In this video, we're going to learn how to use tool scripts in Godot so that we can actually have our room UI update in real time as we change variables. So instead of a house, I could type house that something. You could type a house that you don't recognize, etc., but it'll update in real time. So we're going to learn how to use tool scripts in order to provide a really nice user interface. And we are going to change our room dictionary, our exit dictionary, to use exits as a resource. So we're going to create a new exit resource, talk about how to use resources, and then change our command processor to look at these resources to make exits really cool and easy to expand later on, so we can make locked exits, for example. So you see here, if I say go east, it works just like we did before, but now it's working using a resource for an exit that connects two rooms. It's going to be really cool, and I'm really excited about this one. Let's get started. Okay, so the big thing that we want to do in this video is actually beef up our exits so that we can customize them a bit more. Maybe we can say they are locked, maybe we can say they are one way, but we just want to create a foundation that makes it easy later on for us to adjust specific exits and give them more characteristics rather than just a two-way connection between a room. Before we do that though, in the last two videos, I talked about our room UI here. There was a reason I made these panel containers rather than just a resource or something that didn't really have a visual component to it. And the reason for that is because I wanted our editor to really display in an easy way for us to tell what our current game world look like. I talked about this is one of the advantages of using a visual editor and engine like Godot over versus a code specific game framework. And so we really want to lean into that. And we didn't actually talk about how we can make that happen, how we can make whatever the variables we set here for our room name and description in the editor actually show up visually for this component itself. You know, we've got a house room and an outside room that are different, but they both look the same in the editor. And so what we want to do first is fix that. So the way that we're actually going to make our room UI components update when we change the variables is by going into our room scene. So I can just click either a house or outside room and hit this open in editor button. And now that I'm in our room scene, I'm going to open our room script. And the way we're going to do this is by making our room script a tool script. So let me just give you a very basic overview of what a tool script is. So in Godot, the Godot editor itself is actually a Godot game. So just let that sink in for a second. The editor itself is a Godot game that is running on the Godot engine. What this means is that Godot lets you have a really amazing level of connection to the editor itself from your scripts. That's why everything works together so well. And what that means is that we can actually define scripts that run not only in our game when we run it by hitting Command B or Control B, but actually run in the editor as we're developing our game. And you can imagine how useful a script that runs in the editor might be when we're trying to do something like this, when we're trying to update our room UI component here based on the values we set on this right side over here for our room name and room description variables. And so because that's what we want to do, we're going to use a tool script here to actually make that happen. And so all you need to do to make a tool script work, or to turn a script into a tool script, is just add the tool keyword at the very top of the script. So I'll start a new line and just type tool. And as soon as I save this, instantly this code is now executing in the editor for each scene that is a room scene in our game. Now, some quick notes. Because tool scripts run in the editor, you can do some somewhat damaging things to your game. So if you're queuing nodes free, or freeing nodes, freeing memory, or deleting things, you can sometimes mess things up or crash your game if you're not careful. You want to be really careful not to free up memory or nodes or scenes that your game relies on and do things that might mess up your scene tree. So just be aware of that. Because tool scripts are running in the editor, they are open to doing things that might cause some damage to your game. Now, just because they're a little risky doesn't mean we shouldn't use them. They're an incredibly valuable part of the Godot engine, but it's just something to be aware of. Now that we have our tool script, this script is executing in the editor, but the problem is that nothing's actually happening because we don't have any functions that are being executed. We have this connect exit function, but this only runs when someone calls it. However, if we use some of Godot's built-in functions, such as the process or ready functions, those will run in our editor. So if you define a ready function, for example, when you run your tool script, or when you add that scene to your tree in your editor, that ready function will run. And you might be asking, well, if I've got a ready function and I have stuff that I want to happen only in the game, but not in the editor, but I still want to make this script a tool script, how do I make that work? And it's a great question, and Godot provides a way for you to run code only in the editor or only in your game. And by only in the game, I mean when you run your game from the editor or you run it from an executable because you've packaged up and shipped out your game. And we'll go over that in just a second. But before that, just an overview of what a tool script is. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Again, feel free to ask questions in the comments below or join our Discord. If you're struggling with tool scripts, they can be a little bit confusing, but I hope that's just a general overview that gets you a bit familiar with it. So because this is now running in the editor, let's think about what we want to do here. If I go to our game scene, basically whenever I add a new room scene, I want to be able to change our room name and room description and have those changes reflected in the editor here. Right now I've got our outside room selected, and you can see that it's got, well, it doesn't have anything right now, but you can see that it's, if I were to give this a name, like, a house, you'll see that if I save that, it doesn't actually change what's in the editor. The UI doesn't change. And so us as developers aren't really helped by having this here because it doesn't immediately just show us what our game map looks like. So we want to change that. So in order to do that, we need to tell Godot somehow that whenever these variables change, our room name and room description, whenever they change, we need to update our room name and room description labels. Because remember, we have access to these labels right here. So since it's a tool script, the code's already running. We just need to actually hook into the changing of these variables. And in order to do that, we're going to use the setGet functionality built into Godot. Now, setGet is a keyword or a concept that's familiar to a lot of different languages. Basically, what it means in Godot is you can define a set function and a get function. You can do only one, or you can do both. You don't have to have a set and a get. You could just do a set or just do a get. And what it means is that if you have a set function, whenever this variable is changed, it doesn't matter where from, whether it's from the editor or from another piece of code running in your game, it doesn't matter. Whenever it changes, your set function will be run instead of just changing this variable itself. Same thing for your get function. From the editor or in your game, whenever someone tries to get this variable, your get function will be run instead if it is defined. The syntax for doing this is to say set function. So we say set get like you have here, and then you give the name of your set function. We don't have one yet. This is just a default value. So this you don't literally type set function, but you would replace this with the name of your function and then comma get function. Now, like I said, the set and the get are optional. You have to have at least one, but you don't have to have both. If you wanted to have both, you would define it like this. But let's say we just wanted the set function. I would get rid of the get function name and the comma, and now whenever someone tries to set room name, this set function will run. But if they try and get room name, it will get just the straight variable itself. It will not run a get function. However, let's say I wanted to have a get function, but no set function. I could get rid of set function here, and then just type comma get function. And this empty comma means there is no set function, but there is a get function. I think the syntax is pretty ugly. Thankfully, it's going to be a lot better in Godot 4 when we have annotations. It seems like that's the current path that the Godot core developers are going down. Anyway, this is a lot. I hope it makes sense. Again, feel free to ask questions, but hopefully this gives you just enough familiarity with set and get to use them. In our case, we don't really care about getting room name. We can just return the room name itself. So we don't need a get function. We do want a set function though. So I'm going to make a new function called set room name. And I need to actually define this name here. You'll see that the setter function isn't defined. I'm getting this error down at the bottom because I'm saying this is our set function, but it's not actually defined. So let's make it now. I'll create a new function. I'll just copy it in, set room name. And we need to give it a variable. We know that the variable that comes in is going to be the new value for this variable. And because this is a string, so is our parameter that comes in here. So I'm going to say new name, and this is going to be a string. And what we want to do is two things. One, remember that we want to change our room name, this label's text value, to actually be our new name. So I'm going to do the $, which is how we get nodes or scenes in our scene tree. And I'm going to find room name right here. And if you don't get that autocomplete there, like you just saw me have, remember, make sure you're on your room scene. You only get autocomplete when you have the scene open that the script you're working in is attached to. So now that I've got room name, it's a label, remember, so I want to get the text property and set this to be new name. So this is going to work, except for one major issue, which is now that we've defined a set variable here, room name, this variable, is not going to be changed by default. We need to actually make sure we explicitly change the value of room name as a variable within our set function. So here we're changing the value of the label. We need to actually change the value of the variable itself. So I need to say room name, and this is going to be equal new name. So here we're saying, hey, whenever we change our room name from the editor, because again, we're not really changing this from our game. We're only going to be changing our room names from the editor. So whenever we change our room name, call this setRoom function. And within this, update our room label to be the new name and update the variable itself to be the new name. Whew, it's kind of a lot trying to explain all of this quickly, but hopefully in a way that makes sense. Let's actually see this in action now to make sure it's working. So if I come back to our game and I select our house room here, and I update our name, if I say a house, we'll see it actually changes in the editor, which is amazing. All of a sudden, we've got a really great way to just change this one value here, and it'll not only change in our game, but in the editor itself. I can do the same thing with our outside room, and we can say outside the house. And again, all of a sudden we've got this value that is updating. And now within our editor, we can totally see the map of our game itself, of our text adventure. So this is incredibly helpful for you developing a text adventure game. You can instantly see your map. And again, if we ever gave a viewport where the user could see this, they would instantly have kind of an overlay. They could see the game map as well. You wouldn't have to implement a separate map on top of your game already as it exists. Now, we've done our room name, but we have not done our room description. So let's do that now. If I go back to our room scene, so hit this open in editor, and then I hit our room script, we can do pretty much the same thing with our room description. So I'm going to add a set get, and this will be set room description. I'm going to copy this name just like I did before. Come over here. Again, we'll see the setter function is not defined error, which is good. That's how we know Godot is working as we'd expect. And I'm going to say new description as the parameter for this function because this is not the name, it's the description. I'm really going to kind of do the exact same thing here. So if I start typing room description, we'll see it pop up. Again, .text, and I'm going to set this to be the new description. So here we are getting our room description label. We're getting the text property on that label. And the reason we're doing that is, remember, this is that text property we're changing. This is what we want to change, not the label itself, just this text property. And once we get the text property, we are updating the description or the text to be our new description. However, though, remember, just as above, because we're using this setter function, we aren't updating our room description anymore. So we need to explicitly update that variable. So I'll say room description, and this is going to be new description. Okay, so now that we've done that, I should be able to go back to our game and we'll see our room names have persisted. So when I click on these, we see our room names have persisted. There's still a house and outside the house. Now, if I change the description, we should see that also update. So I can say a random house that you've never seen before. Anyway, so we've got our room now, and we've seen that when we update our room description, it updates on here. And if I click back and forth and switch scenes, it persists. So if I save this, we see that our room name and description persist, which is really amazing. It's all of a sudden we've made this so much easier for us as developers. I can do the same thing with our outside room. So we can say you are outside of the random house in the middle of the village. Again, we can make actually good content for our game later. Right now, excuse my poor writing. One thing you might notice is that our room description is kind of hard to read because it's a lot of text in a small field. And one really cool thing about Godot, if I go into our room script again, is that you can actually provide some more editor hints to tell it what type of export variables there are. So this is not actually defining what type of variable the variable itself is, but it's telling the editor how to display that exported variable to you as a developer. And one thing that it allows is there's a multi-line flag that you can give it. So this room description, it'd be really nice if it was a huge text box, a multi-line text box, and not just like a single line thing. So what we can actually do is after string here in our export hints, I can make a comma and then do multi-line, just all caps here. And this is one of many available editor hints or export hints you can give the Godot engine. There's a whole page in the Godot documentation about export hints. I highly recommend you looking it up. I'll try and include that in the description for this video. But now you'll see if I go to our house room or house game, or our outside room or house room, you'll see that this is a huge text box now, which makes it way easier to edit. We could do the same thing for our room name, but I think they're generally going to be short enough we won't. But just wanted to show that that's a way that we can make our editor or our developer experience a little bit better by making our room description string our text boxes multi-line rather than just single line. Wow, that was a lot of work just to get our UI updating, but now we've got that going forward, which is going to make editing and adding new rooms and changing their values really, really easy. So I hope you're tracking. I hope that's been a good intro to both export or to tool scripts, to set gets, and you're starting to see the value of using an engine like Godot, even for simple games like a text adventure, because of the really awesome functionality it gives you right out of the box. So now that we have spent all that time getting our export variables working, now we can actually start working on beefing up our exits a little bit and making them better. So if I come into our room script, again, by just selecting the script button in the editor here on our house or outside room. So we've got exits here. It's a dictionary. The keys in that dictionary are strings. The values are rooms, right? We're setting our exits of east, so a string, to self, which is a room. So we've got string keys and room values. Now, what if we replaced our room values with values of a new object or a new type of class or type of script we created called exits? And within that exit, it had the room it exited to, but it also had other properties like is locked, is one way, etc. You can expand on it with whatever properties you want. I think that would give us the best foundation going forward. It would be the easiest to customize. And I think it would be better than just having the room itself. So we're going to do that. We're going to create a new exit something, an exit class, object, reference, whatever. Now, as we consider that, we need to think about what that will be, like what we want our exit to be. Eventually, we're probably going to want it to be visual, right? So we can hook it into our little map here. We want it to be represented visually, but it's going to be a little complicated. So I think to start off, we don't want to do that. So no visual component on our exits right away. Eventually, again, I hope we'll get to that. But so if we don't want a visual component, we're kind of left with three options. This isn't one of the options, but everything in Godot that appears in your scene tree is a node, right? But in Godot, you might not know that you can actually create scripts that are not attached to nodes in your scene tree. You can actually create scripts just like any other language, or really like any other object-oriented language, because scripts are usually class-based. And so we have three options if we want to create a type of object that does not exist in our scene tree, that is not tied to a node object. And those three objects are, and I'm going to list them in order from most basic to most complex. They're all pretty simple and basic, but we'll start with the most basic. So three options. The first is object. Object is the base class for pretty much anything in Godot. And objects are not reference counted. You have to manually manage the memory for an object. So if everything that uses a given object is deleted, then that object will be floating out in space, but still taking up memory, which is not good. So objects are manually memory managed. That is a lot of M's. So I don't think we want to use an object because we kind of want to take advantage of Godot's built-in memory management. So objects are the most basic, but manual memory management. So we're not going to use those. The next thing, which is slightly more complicated, are references. References are a type of class in Godot that inherits or extends from object, but they are reference counted. So in Godot, if you have a reference object, for example, and it is referenced by multiple different nodes or scenes or whatever, and all those scenes are deleted, Godot will automatically delete your reference as well because it has no more actual references to anything else. So references are one step above an object in that Godot will automatically take care of deleting a reference if everything that actually references that reference is deleted. So references are a little bit better than an object. Typically in Godot, you really only want to use an object, like the base object class itself, if you really know what you're doing. Typically, if you're just trying to make the simplest script class possible, you want to use a reference. But both objects and references, I think, are not what we want to use in our case, even though references are a much better match than an object. So those are our first two options. The third option is a resource, and resources are really cool and one of my favorite parts about Godot. You can think of resources somewhat similarly to scriptable objects in Unity. It's not a one-to-one comparison. There are some differences, but I think that is a comparison that will make it much easier for most people to understand what a resource is. And so what a resource is one, it is reference counted. So it is similar to a reference in the sense that if everything that uses a given resource is deleted, that resource itself will be deleted. So Godot will handle the memory management for you, which is super nice. We want that. But the other things that make resources really, really nice are that one, they can use signals. So we can have a resource with a script attached and have signals attached to it that our other nodes and other scripts can kind of make use of, or that resource itself can respond to signals. So that's really powerful. But the other thing that's really, really nice about resources is that they are automatically serialized by the Godot engine. So for example, if we made our exits be resources, we could very easily save our exits just as resources. We won't have to do any editing to them. We could just automatically save our resources, our exits, and it would save whether that exit was locked or unlocked, for example. We wouldn't have to manually, if we did like a reference, for example, we would have to do some custom saving logic and then re-instance upon loading those references and then manually set the locked property, for example, to be locked or unlocked. With a resource, that gets saved right into the resource itself. You don't have to manually load it in and then do some logic on top of that. So I hope that comparison makes a little bit of sense. It's kind of hard to do without a visual aspect to kind of do that comparison on your own. But I think out of all those three options, the object, the reference, and the resource is going to be our best option. And it's just a really good chance for me to kind of walk you through how to use resources in Godot, since they're one of my favorite things about the Godot engine. So all that to say, now that we've considered all three of those options, I think that the resource is the best option for our exits. And so that's what we're going to use right here to make our new exit system. Okay, so we're going to use resources. That's all well and good, but how do we actually do that? Well, so glad you asked. The first thing we need to do is make a new script. So in order to do that, I'm just going to right click in our file system tab here, right click and hit new script. Now you'll notice there's a new resource button. Again, this is one of the really amazing thing about resources is that they become something that's easy to add and re-instance or create new instances of resources within the editor itself. But we'll get to that in a second. I'm going to hit new script and I'm going to call this exit.gg. So now I created it. We've got an exit.gd script. I'm going to have to double click on it to open, and you'll see it extends node right now. Now, we don't want to add our resource or our exits to our scene tree. So there's no reason for it to be a node right now. So I'm going to change this to not extend node, but instead to extend resource. And I'm going to get rid of all the boilerplate here. Now that we have our script here, we can just edit it like any other script that is attached to a node, except it's attached to a resource. So what are the things that we need our exit itself to have? The first thing we need is just to put what room it connects to. So I'm just gonna say variable room, and we'll just leave it for that for now. I'm gonna actually type it as a room, and we'll just set it up to be null at the start, not nuck. And then we can add whatever other properties we want. The only property I want to add right now is just whether it's locked or not. So I can say variable is locked, and we're going to default this to be a Boolean. So I'm just going to say colon equals, and we'll say false. This will just tell it that it's a Boolean by default. It'll default to false, and we've got to manually update is locked. And later on, we're going to have to do a bunch more stuff with this, like actually adding, okay, if it is locked, what object does it need in order to be unlocked? But for now, we'll keep it simple. And now that we've got this, what we can actually do in our room, so we've got our exit here. What I'm going to do is add a class name to it, similar to like what we did with room. So I'm going to class name exit. Now that we've got our basic exit class set up here, let's talk about one other cool thing about resources. I think I mentioned this before, which is that in Godot, if you instance a resource for the first time or load a resource for the first time, every other time that you try and load that same resource in, Godot will detect that it's already loaded and instead return a reference to that resource. So it will prevent you from loading in the same thing multiple times or creating multiple instances of the same resource. Now, there's sometimes you want to override this. You do want multiple instances of the same base resource, but Godot by default will take care of that for you. And it's pretty easy to override that. Let's say like if you're making an RPG and you've got items, for example, and you want multiple items that are the same resource, you can pretty easily set it to be to create new or unique resources on each time it loads it in. But by default, it won't do that. And the way that we've kind of got it set up now, if we think about our exit dictionary that we have in rooms, is we've got it where it's creating the same exit for both rooms. So we've got our house and our outside, for example, right? And if we want to go east from our house, we have an exit that goes east to, or from the house, we've got an exit that goes east to the outside. And then from outside, we have an exit that goes west to the house. So we're kind of creating two things when we really only need one. And so one thing we could do with a resource, for example, is make each resource each exit be a two-way thing. So the house going east and the outside going west. So these could both reference the same resource, and each exit could just keep track of which room it has on each side. And so we can maybe try doing that, for example. So instead of just having one room here, we could have, for example, we could say room 1. And this is going to be kind of arbitrary. So there's going to be some things that we're going to need to change. But I can say room 2, for example, and we can say room 1 is locked, and do the same thing here. So I can say var room 2 is locked and set this to be false. And now we can have each exit can determine whether each direction is locked or not. Again, if you want to do something weird eventually where you've got exits that can go to more than 2 rooms, then that's more than just one room to another, then you're going to run into some trouble with this system. But this is one example of we can actually cut down on the overall amount of stuff we have to create in our game by just creating one exit resource whenever we connect 2 rooms. So now that we've kind of got this exit structure in place, we've got our basic resource, let's actually look at how we would implement this into our game. So if I come back to our room script and we look at our connect exit function, there's some changes we're going to have to make here in order to make our exits work with our new resource system. Now, remember that we made our exits be 2-directional. So they remember both room 1 and room 2. So if I come back to our room script here, now that we're here, let's start actually implementing or adding in our new exit system and see how it simplifies this connect exit function here. So now that we have an exit structure, let's actually implement instance a new exit. And so in order to instance or create a new resource object, which is what our exits are, we can say var exit, and then we're going to say equals, and then what we can do is just say exit.new. And so the new keyword is built into any type of resource or object or whatever. It's all the same thing. And we're going to create a new exit. Now we know that exits have a room 1 and room 2 property. So we can say exit.room1. And this is going to be self, right? Because we want our room 1 to be the self that's doing the connecting. And we can say exit.room2. This is going to be room, which we're defining. It's a parameter that's coming in. And so whenever we connect an exit, we're creating a new exit resource here. And we're saying that room 1 is the self. It is the room that is doing the connecting, and room 2 is the room it's connecting to. And all of a sudden, we've got an exit variable here. And what we can say is say exits of direction. So this is this first line we've got. So you notice we've got a lot of code duplication here, right? We're always saying exits direction equals room. Well, we can just say that up here actually, just so whenever we do this, exits of direction equals room. Exits of direction equals exit, because remember, we're not storing rooms anymore, we're storing exits. And so for this room, the exit in that direction is this exit resource. But the real power of using resources, remember, the reason we made a room 1 and a room 2 is because we can now use this resource to connect both ways. We're using the same resource for both sides of the exit connection. And so one, we can get rid of all these exits.direction equals room lines. So I'm going to get rid of all of these. Now, we still need this match here because we want to, just as a convenience way to automatically connect certain elements. So west automatically connects to east and vice versa, north to south and vice versa. But instead of connecting or creating a new entry in the other room's exits for east, for example, that leads to a room, we want it to lead to the same exit we just created, right? So we're going to change all these to be exit instead of self. And so now what we're doing is we're saying, so let's say, for example, real example here, that we've got, this is our house, right? And we're connecting our house to our outside. Well, our house of east is going to be an exit where room 1 is the house and room 2 is outside. And the direction here is going to be east. So room 1, the house, connects east to outside. Then we're saying that that other room outside connects to the west to this same exit object. So we're using the same exit object or exit resource for both sides of the connection. It's going to be the same thing being referenced on both the east and west side of this connection between the house and outside. And it's going to happen automatically. So we still keep the really nice feature where we only need to connect rooms from one side to the other, but it's going to automatically work and only use one resource to make that connection. Okay, so this is kind of complicated, and I'm not saying this is the best way ever to do this, but it is memory efficient, and it's going to let us do whatever editing we need to these actual exits going forward. We've made a really nice architectural decision that's going to let us have maximum customizability for these exits as we want to going forward. The only thing we need to do now is actually change our command processor so that when we move between rooms, it's actually looking at these exits instead of just the room itself. Okay, so we've got this, and it should be working, but the problem is that we've updated our exits dictionary here. Instead of having rooms, it's having these exit resources we've created, and we haven't actually updated our command processor to work with these. So our game's not going to work, but let's just try and run it and see what happens. And you're going to notice that we get this parser error saying the class room was found in global scope, but its script couldn't be loaded. I think this is an issue we've already dealt with, which is the problem of cyclic dependencies. And so if you go into our errors here, you'll see this these two errors here saying room is already being loaded, cyclic reference. And so this is one of the problems, unfortunately, with Godot as it stands now, is that we can't have these, our types can't reference each other, because from room we are referencing our exits here. Our exit cannot then reference a room again because it makes a circle from room to exit and back to room and then to exit, etc. And so it causes an error with the editor. So unfortunately, we have to get rid of our room typing here in our editor and just have them be non-typed variables for now. And so now if I go back to our room and try running this game, we'll see that it works. It's not going to work the way we want to. If I try going somewhere, we're going to get an error, but we've at least got something good enough that our game runs, and we're ready now to edit our command processor and start making it work with our new exit system. So now that we're looking at our command processor, it's important to remember that for our rooms, we didn't actually change what our keys in our dictionary were. Those are still strings that correspond to directions. What we've changed are our values. So in our command processor, we shouldn't need to update anything where we're looking at the keys in our exits dictionary, really just the values. And if you look at that, you'll notice that in our go function, we are looking here at the keys when we're determining if an exit is valid. And same in change room here, we're looking at our keys to join. So there's really only one place that we are actually looking at our values, and that's on this line 35 here, where we're looking at the exit, the value of exits for our current room, if we've determined that we've entered in a valid direction for our second word. So here is where we actually need to get the room itself, because right now when we index into our exits dictionary like this, we're actually going to return an exit. So we actually need to get the room. But here's the problem with the way we've implemented this. Again, I'm not saying this is the best implementation, but I think it's better than what we have, and we're making it better. But there is one problem with it, and that's how do we determine if we are in room 1 or room 2? And the reason I called it room 1 and 2 instead of left room and right room or west room and east room is because we want it to be generic exit structure. We don't want it to be tied to a west and east room, for example. But the problem is we have to determine which side of the exit we're on. Or if we're on the room 2 side, then when we find the exit, we need to go to room 1 and vice versa. So we've got to add some logic right now to do that determination for us. Now, we could add that logic into our command processor, but I think that logic is intrinsic to an exit. An exit should be able to tell us which side of itself we're on, which side of the exit we're on. And so I kind of want to add a function to our exit script that'll do that. So in order to do that, let's add a new function, and I'm just going to say this will be function, we'll say get exit. And so it'll take a room. We have to pass in room. Again, remember, because of the cyclic dependencies, we're not going to type it here, unfortunately. Here's hoping that Godot 4 will have a better way to do that. I really want something, side note, similar to like what you can do in TypeScript or many other languages, where you can just have type declaration functions that exist outside of the function where those types get used. So you could have like a static types file that other functions could actually just pull in. And so there's not a cyclic dependency because you've just got your own type file somewhere that is getting used across the board. It's not always the best situation or best solution to problems, but it would definitely help here. And it would be nice to be able to define classes or types in Godot or in GDScript like that. But that's an aside, just a little rant there. I do love me some TypeScript. But okay, so we're going to get the exit here. And what we need to do is say if room equals room1. And we're going to do really simple Boolean logic here for this. We're not going to use a match statement. We'll just use a couple if-else's because we only have two conditions, and I'm not sure a match can actually match on a object rather than a primitive type. I know it can do arrays and dictionaries, but I don't know if it can do like a node or a resource itself. So I could be wrong, but I think it's just easier to do an if-else here. So we'll just do if it's room1, do something, and then we'll say elif room equals room2. You can see where this is going. And we need to have a special case where if neither of them match, we can do something else. So we need to print out an error here. So like print error we can do. So this is the case where we try and get an exit for a room, but the room we're in is not actually on either side of the exit that we're currently looking at. This should never happen, but in case it does, we need to have some error handling here. So we can say the room you tried to find is not connected to this exit. And you can give whatever error message you want here, but just something to say like, hey, if you see this, you need to look in our code and we need to figure out what went wrong. And so what we need to do here is, remember, we're going to be calling this from our command processor. So we're going to be calling it from the current room that we are in, and we need to find the other room. So we'll be current room.exits.get room or get room to go to, something like that. Actually, we call this get exit. Let's call it get other room because we're trying to get the other room on this exit. So if our room is room 1, we want to return room 2. And if it's room 2, we want to return room 1. Now, again, we could simplify this a lot. We could use a ternary operator. But I think the reason I want to do that is to explicitly have this print statement here. We can also just return null here as well. And so now we know that we are going to return the other room. And so what we can do is we actually have to get this exit now, and we can call this get other room function. So what I'm going to do instead is change this up a little bit. So I'm going to say var exit, and this is going to be, we're going to grab pretty much the same thing that we have here. So what are we doing? We're going to get our current room, and we're going to get the exit associated with the direction, the second word. So this is now going to be an exit. And from within this exit, we need to say exit.get other room, because remember, this exit is going to be one of our exit objects, and the function we just made is get other room. Now we need to pass a room in. Actually, I'm going to call this current room just to make it a little bit more clear that this is the current room that we're in. So let me just change these real quick. Okay, so we are passing in the current room and getting out the other room. So that means when we call this function here in our command processor, we also need to pass in the current room. Thankfully, we do have the current room. It's just the variable current room that we're keeping track of in our command processor. So I can just pass it in as current room. Okay, so now we should have not only a new exit system that uses exit resources, which are going to be easy to serialize. So let's say we have a locked exit eventually, and then the player unlocks it. We can actually save that exit in its current state as now unlocked, so that when we load it in, it's automatically unlocked and we don't have to do that logic. So we've got resources for exits that connect two rooms. And we've now updated our command processor to actually get the correct room for the other side of the exit we're currently looking at. Okay, so if I run it, we'll see All right, we are in a house as we'd expect, and I can try go west. Again, this should throw an error because it's not a valid exit, so that still works. And if I go east, we'll see we are now outside the house. It is outside of the random house in the middle of the village. All right, so this all looks good so far. Let me try go east again just to make sure I can't go in an invalid direction. Now, if I try going west, we should see we are back in the house. And we are. We are now in a house, a random house you've never seen before. Oh, man. Guys, this was a long video. We covered a lot of stuff. Again, a lot of complicated things because we're just trying to make a system that is going to be really easy for us to expand upon later, but sometimes that means doing a lot of the hard and complicated work up front. So thanks so much for sticking with it. I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned a lot. If you did enjoy this video, a like and subscribe is very helpful. It supports the channel and helps it grow and is much appreciated. We'd love to have you in our Discord if you have any questions about the video. Link to that is in the description below. And if you found my work helpful, you can donate a coffee on Buy Me a Coffee. Link to that also in the description below. That helps me continue to make great and free tutorials for you. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Appreciate it. Hope you've enjoyed the video. See you in the next one.